Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Are you coming for PQ Talks? We hired them to do this. They are paid to do this. Now, the idea is simple. This is the last PQ Talks at PQ. Oh. But it is still here. Now, we will be going for roughly 90 minutes, and you may have noticed that as part of PQ Talks, we have spoken about stuff, about costumes, we've spoken about puppets, we've spoken about innovation, we've spoken about ecology, we've spoken about gender, about transformation, expansion, but we've also spoken about curating PQ. We've spoken about the individual programs, so this has been a platform for us to understand the stories behind the artwork, the stories about the ideas, the interventions, and so on. So the very final PQ Talks panel, Baro, am I right in saying that? I have to ask my boss, Barbara Příhodová, who's the curator, okay? If she agrees, and she says yes, so I may say this. So we've got, it's called the Vanishing Boundaries. Vanishing Boundaries. Was that your word? Markéta, was this your idea? Okay, vanishing boundaries between physical and digital world. Were they ever any? Well, maybe. Now, so this is a discussion panel with curators and work leaders of the 360 or 36 curators. And Kubo, can I ask you for the presentations? Okay, brilliant. I'll click to the third one. So it's these people. And the following 8 people will be on stage. So as I call them out, please welcome them in with an appropriately moderate applause, because I'll be speaking over your applause. So first of all, Markéta Fantová, who is the artistic director of PQ, but also co-curator of 36Q. Honza Rolník, Pavla Beranová, the lighting designer. Pavla Beranová. Tereza Stehlíková, the environment working group leader, then Rob Kaplovitz, sound design working group leader, Paul Sigis, the virtual reality working group leader, John Richards, the experimental sound work group leader, and Chris van Goethem, construction work group leader. And
the prize goes to PQ Talks curators. There we go.
Well, you can sit down and have questions. Thank you.
So let me just quickly introduce this project, 360 or 36Q, or whichever way we chose to pronounce it. This is a second time we have tried this project. The first one happened as a pilot project in 2016. And our team was much smaller, and it was about sound and light in Lapidarium. And then I invited Jan to co-curate this project with me for this PQ. And you see what happened? Once you invite a co-curator, things happen to grow a little. So now we have a fabulous team of many people and many different areas to cover. And hopefully all of you had a chance to see what we call our little hell over in the small sports hall, where it's extremely hot at the moment. So hot, in fact, that the VR is slightly stopping here and there. So I'll just pass it on to Jan to say a few words about the project, and then down the line for each one of you to cover the areas that you were working on as a team. And I want to say this was an incredible teamwork that got really hard at times. We all survived, we're still friends, and it was actually wonderful. We started with questions, we ended up with even more questions, which I think is great.
Thank you. This was essentially a collaborative project. I mean, the people were everything on this project, and they were the main reason and the main source of everything on this. That's why I want to say that we are missing on the list, and in between ourselves, few people, we are missing Shannon Harvey, who is not here, and he was essential for our project. And we are missing Joris Widom from Netherlands, who was also a leader of VR work group. Well, and Romain, I'm sorry, and we are missing the lead artist, who is Romain Tardy, a French artist living in Brussels, who was our spine, our backbone in a way. So now, should I try to explain the structure of the project, or yes? Why? Okay, please do so.
Okay, so why 360 at PQ? I think we should start with that. And I think at PQ we try to bring a bit of past, as I said before, but we also want to see what the future has to offer, and we really wanted to experiment with new media and new available, I don't want to say toys because we didn't want to get overpowered by toys, but just explore new avenues. And having Romain Tardy, who's not here with us, as a person who comes from visual arts, we were also trying to bridge visual arts, which is Jan's background, and theater arts, which is my background, and each team member's background is different. So we wanted to see what we really can get out of collaboration and a different structure of the team. I do have to say that this was not only a project that was trying to reach a certain installation, and our goal was not to have a absolutely beautiful, perfect professional installation, but this was also a workshop and an intensive. So the journey and the process mattered even more than perhaps the result.
So the collaboration and communication on this project was essential, and some kind of creative coordination was very important for us. Even just explaining the project from the start to our colleagues was a challenge. But we found our tools to do that. Can I? Thank you. This is something we call mind map of the whole project. We just found this amazing tool which is called Miro, and it's a real-time board where you can actually share your ideas, references, pictures, whatever you want in real time. So you can discuss with all the people, and it stays there. It's easy to use and very nice thing. So if you're searching for a tool to coordinate within international group of creative people, this is amazing tool. Here you can see the whole thing. This is our whole mind map of the whole project. It has different, let's say, zooms, focus, frames. I will just run through a few of them very quickly so that you have a basic idea of the structure and complexity of the project. This is something I think Rob sketched in the Miro board. Markéta did, and it's like a basic. Yeah, and it was like a really collaborated things, and this is like a basic structure of creation of the thing. We have Roman, we have creative integration group, we have sound led by Rob, we have lighting by Paula, video Roman, dirty sound group led by John, and tactile environments, and now it's developing as a kind of a flower. This was our first start with the basic idea of the space itself, the whole sports hall. This was very basic division of the spaces and their usage. Then we came up with Roman was the first to sketch the architectural solution for the whole thing. And now all of us started to build up on this first spatial architectural solution of the whole installation. So this is how we were talking about where we put the VR, with what we will put in the pools, how we live it up, and this was the way how we were preparing for the build-up. This is, for example, a simple structure of a technical system.
So one of our goals was to create a completely interrelated system, and I want to say, like, at the outset of this chat, we failed partially in it, but the notion was to have every aspect of the installation speak to and affect every other aspect. So we were looking to move beyond simply working together towards influencing each other with each other's work. And so what we developed was this is sort of a signal flow that we developed to sort of explore how both audio and data would move between the groups. So for example, we would get information from microphones in the room that would go through the sound console. I would then process it via Dante and through a computer, and then send the audio data out to our main server, and that would then send the data to lighting, and send the data to projections, and actually send the data back to us. This was an ideal, and later in the talk I can talk about what did and didn't happen. But then everyone got to, once we started putting this information on here, each department could add their control, so that what we were trying to do was utilize the technology for the sake of using the technology, but utilize the technology to advance the artistic conversation.
Oh, okay. Maybe I would now hand over to Paula. Maybe these are.
You can continue with this one, and then we can.
Okay. So this was, I think, Roman's first. Sorry. Maybe you do it, Rob. You're great in talking, much better than me.
Who wants to do that? Rob?
Do I have to do it again? Okay. When we started, the first idea that was brought to the table came from Romain, and it was called the Blue Hour, right? And the notion was that moment in light as the sun is setting. I think it comes from a poem in French that I had never read, but that moment when the sun is setting and everything can become something else. And that was our original launch. And what I don't know, and I don't know if it came out of the group meeting, but there was a moment when the decision was made to move from that to this circadian rhythm. Was that at the group meeting? You want to talk about it, Paul? Oh, it was just from one of the Zoom meetings? We had a lot of meetings online. Here, Paul will talk about how we made the transition from the blue hour into the circadian rhythm.
I'm going to make something up now. Well, I think it came, I mean, I'm also trying to, let's just preface this as saying this is the first time we've actually had a conversation all together about this, collectively. This really is it. So you're witnessing raw, unplugged thinking on the fly. But yeah, to pick up where Rob left off, that moment when we can no longer delineate the difference between, on the horizon, the sky and the ocean, which comes out as a nautical term, was something that was incredibly provocative for each of us. And I think we went for quite a while imagining what that liminal space might be, how it might be a moment of extreme transformation in each of the departments. And then at a certain point in the conversation, Roman came to clarify, or let's just say delineate, a sharper focus, which still had to root tremendously into the notion of transformation. So the idea of moving through the circadian clock of a human cycle, or the circadian clock of the planet as we might take, or the different seasons for us in VR, which are a little bit more obvious. This kind of idea of large-scale transformation really came out of our moment when we met all together in Prague in February. And that was the only time, I should say from a process vantage, it was the only time that we actually came all together collectively to meet, which was a fight actually to acquire all together, that we were each making our case to actually be together face to face in the room and say, you know, how are we going to move from just a kind of fancy poetic image of a horizon line disappearing to something more concrete? And I think at that point, correct me if I'm wrong in any way, but we really then kind of embarked on a journey of pinpointing this notion of transformation in a 24-minute cycle, coming out of a 24-minute clock. And so then each minute has been divided in this process and in what you see into a sort of slice of a circadian rhythm that starts with, in a sense, waking up in the morning, going through the busyness of the morning process, getting to the afternoon where there's some lethargy and some calming, to the evening sort of culmination in some ecstatic, you know, festivities, of course, and the sort of all-night burn that might land us back into the rising of the sun again. And that's been a deeply driving image and distinctly different in how it's been rendered for each of us. And I think that's probably a good point then to come here, because then those visualizations or those mood maps, those mood boards, I think probably Pavla, you want to maybe speak to this because you've been, you know, really crucial in organizing this structure and feeding us, at least in the virtual reality group, feeding us images that we can get excited by and to trigger us and to unify us through a series of images. So this is the first time we put sort of image to the whole concept of a 24-hour circadian cycle.
Does it work? Okay. Sorry, I'm into lighting, so sorry. So maybe let's see what is the next slide. Okay, so here, speaking about mood boards and the steps in this project, here there's a next step, because it was all about steps. We had to make this process efficient. So one task was to we had to keep the idea and keep the concentration on the project. And the other task, very important and very new, at least for me, was to share the different steps with other people. So we were developing, this was one of the most interesting parts of the project for me, because we had to develop different ways how to share what our ideas with other people from the very beginning. And because, as Paul already mentioned, we met only once, and I think this meeting triggered really a very interesting creative process. But since we had to share the ideas within the core team and then share them again in a different way with the participants of the workshop. So this, what you can see on the screen, is my interpretation of Roman's mood board, because what I did was to translate his reference images to more specific light effects. So I didn't use reference images from other fields. I only used lighting references. So it was this next step to make it more specific. And I shared this with my participants and with the rest of the group, so to give them more impulse for their work. And then from this, because we had many conversations with Rob and with Romain especially, this was very interesting, how to create a timeline where we can put our ideas and content and done work, so we can see it, so we can see the whole thing before going to the space. And there were many interesting ideas, like creating, for example, Joris from VR department had the excellent idea to create a project in film editing software, so we can play a kind of sequence of reference images to feel what it could look like when we will really do that. And it was actually it was very funny. I had to, for the first time in my life, I had to visualize slides. I've never done it before. I always programmed live. And it was a very interesting journey. Yeah. So this is what they forced me to do in the end, because I had to. For me, it was quite unfamiliar, but I had to share it somehow. So I actually started to work in 3D visualization software. I took the 3D model from the VR guys, put it to my environment, and started to create the lighting. And then I could also, it made it possible for me to use the software, it's Capture by the way, to use it to share the work with my participants. It was 6 young designers, and I shared the file with them so they could start to create their own images. And I think it all worked very well. I have this impression. And yeah, so I think I will pass the microphone to some other departments to speak about their process, because this was my process, and I think we can, for example, hear something about tactile environment, because Teresa's department, because one last thing, I had 2 teams in my participant group. One was busy with these big effects in the whole space, and one was busy with small effects around the different pools. And these 2 young designers were in very close contact with Teresa's department, and now she will tell you something more about it.
So I suppose I have been brought in as a kind of contrast to all the technology, because there was so much sort of high, latest technology that there was also a need maybe to contrast it with something very low-key, something very material. And my background is, even though I'm actually a filmmaker, so I also work in visual world, but I've become very interested in multisensory perception and the importance of touch in creating a kind of emotional experience and connecting with people's embodied memories. And so in a sense, I felt my approach was very different to the time-based media in the group. I was almost thinking of the 4 phases of the sort of time-based element as a spatial element by picking 4 different pools and then kind of applying different techniques, like one of them inspired by Marinetti, the Italian futurist, where he created these tactile values for touch. So it's very much a kind of, so basically the idea of using touch, which is something that I've taken from Jan Švankmajer as well, the Czech artist, is that we live in a culture that's oversaturated by audiovisual media. We're bombarded by advertisements, and we're not really, we're not able to experience it in a fresh way. And sense of touch is still not been aesthetized so much. So there's a kind of purity. So that was my take on this, was let's try and bring people closer to that sense of childhood discovery when you're playing with materials, where you're not really thinking about how things might look, but it's a very different kind of aesthetics if you close your eyes. And I think that was actually one of the very interesting moments that's happened in this project, is that we had this coming together of these different perspectives on sort of aesthetic experience, where the tactile sort of clashing, or in dialogue, it depends how you want to look at it, with the visual sense of a kind of different take on aesthetic experience. So for me, that was actually a very interesting experience of having this moment, whether maybe someone else might come to continue.
John, do you want to talk more about your part of it?
Hello, my name's John Richards, and I was presented with the challenge of how to create sound within an installation that already would have sound. So this was one of the main challenges for me. I also wanted to be sensitive to the sound that was already in the installation, or that would be in the installation. So this forced me to think kind of laterally, really, and to the point where I considered exploring the unwanted spaces of the installation, the glitched spaces, as I called them. A lot of my work as dirty electronics is about process, and I also suggested that the collaborators, the participants who I worked with, would not really work within a fixed time frame, but a more non-linear framework, ultimately, where we would develop our work throughout the duration of the installation. So we existed as a kind of workshop installation on the boundary, if you like, on the periphery, on the, well, in the liminal space between the beginning and the end of the installation. And this is one of the most challenging and rewarding aspects of the work for me. And also then trying to find ways to work with the material that already was being created by some of the other artists.
I think it'd only be fitting to go over to the macro, micro audio concept.
Okay. So yeah, absolutely. So we had the visual environment, which was being defined largely by light and projections. We had the tactile environment. We had the sort of micro sound environment and the VR environment. And then there was this macro audio environment that was hoping to connect large and small. And so what we did was, and I don't think this got mentioned at the beginning, so I'll just say, when we started the project, there was a large discussion of how we would utilize the participants, one of whom is right there on the screen, how we would work with a group, because we are all, and I think we kind of came to an agreement on this, we're all quite experienced professionals who get to make work all the time. Not always on this scale, but often on this scale. And so what was interesting and exciting to us was when Markéta and Jan approached us, with this idea of adding participants, was to actually put the work group into the sort of content driver's seat. And so what we were doing was creating, to use Romain's phrase, a playground, and we wanted these sort of young or emerging professionals to fill the playground with their vision. And so, and I think we've each done it in a different way, which has been pretty thrilling. But for me, the key to the experience was moving from being the sort of creating artist to being the curating artist, and there was again, successes and things to be improved. But what we were trying to do was create an environment that would fill the space, the main space, leaving glitched spaces for John's audio, and then also have that environment react to the small events. So to events in Teresa's pool, where we put bioconductive paint, or rather, into areas of the pool so that when things touched, it would send a signal. To the scaffolding that Romain put at the two ends. We put contact microphones, so as you walked on the scaffolding, it would send data. So that we were trying to, this image here, actually, can you go back one, Jan? Oh, we have no control. So the image that we just passed, which had the bamboo poles in it, this is just like our process right here. Once it started, that was it. There was paint at the bottom, so the notion was that if someone took a pole out and put it back in, it would change the entire soundscape for 1 second, right? So all the sound would drop out, and all the lights would focus on that pool for 1 second, and then, almost like, ooh, you did that, and then, boom, it would go back into the rhythm of the event. So that was the idea of a macro-micro. In the end, that didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen was that, and this is totally like real-world logistics deal with the problems, which was that Shannon, who was hired as our integration coordinator, ended up being our video troubleshooter. So he spent 72 hours straight in that room fixing video servers instead of being able to integrate. So what we had to do was we had to come up with ways that we could still interact with all of the various fields, so we didn't lose the spirit of it, but that we acknowledged that that inciting vision wasn't going to be a part of this particular installation.
Yeah, it's working. We're technologically challenged, obviously, here with mics. So we keep talking about participants, but I think we need to go back and explain what that means exactly. So we had a lead artist, and for some reason we started using the word department, which I never liked, I have to tell you now, I never liked that. But it was just for the lack of words. We needed to find a way how we distinguish between the groups that are working. And each of these artists had participants who came and worked with them. So I think that's quite clear. But all together, all of us, and you should probably just know that, when we did the count, we had about 80 people all together. So it was 80 people working together on the spot. Prior to getting to this project, working long distance, working over Zooms, meeting once in Prague, that was us. But once we got here, that was a lot more people. To organize something like that and keep it all in track, of course, it wasn't always super successful because it needs a very, very tight and perfect schedule, on top of which, as you know, working with technology, including this mic, trying to turn it on and off is a challenge. Now imagine servers and lights and queues and all kinds of things. Of course there were glitches and issues and problems and stuff. And think about the days we had. We had how many days from? We had 7 days. Originally we wanted more, but we're at Výstaviště, which has certain contractual issues and such. So we ended up with 7 days. So we, in a way, no, určitě. So we had 7 days to do that. And the help that we got was also from students from RITS, and I'll pass it on to, or if you can grab a mic and tell us what that means for yet another group of students that join us.
Yes, so we jumped in a little bit later when the concept was more or less done, and we're, well, I don't like to say technicians because we believe technicians are actors with a technical medium. So it's not like the plugs are not important. It's the toys, and I know all my students love all the toys, but at the end, it's not about the toys, it's about the essential material we use, what is light and sound and image. And it was a fantastic experience for them to kind of break in all these different groups. On one hand, doing all the practical things, but at the same time, being part of a group of, I think, 60 designers, if you call it all in total, which is kind of a challenge, and kind of trying to get all these things working together, and also dealing with, if you move this, then we have to move that, and that type of stuff. And I think this way of cooperating to get to a common result is a unique opportunity for all the young people that were there, that I think will change their life in the future, and their way of working and their way of looking at the way we produce.
I just want to say that one of the things that got me excited about the project, in addition to the sort of work with the youths, was sort of this ongoing exploration. I think it's in all of our processes. I don't know if we'll all use the same words for it, but it's ongoing exploration of what is the actual fundamental message of our media. What is being created through our media? Light is illumination, but what does that actually mean? How does it change things? And how do we use these medium in the performance arts, in installation art? How do we, like, what is the point of using sound, of using light, of using projections, of using tactile, of using VR? Like, why do it at all? And so for me, one of the really thrilling explorations was to work with all of these artists who are exploring this and sort of look at, the summoning of things that don't exist into space, the relating to things that you don't know what they are. There was a moment when Teresa was talking about maybe making the tactile environments completely blind, so you would reach in and not know what you were touching and be transported to all different places just the very notion of transportation, right, of moving us from a place that we think we know into a new place. So for me, that was the ongoing engagement, is what is the sort of content irrelevant? What is the event that we're going to create as a group? Does that make sense? Or does that sound like intellectual babble? Little bit of both? Nice.
I think maybe VR wants to explore on that, because there was a moment,
Yeah.
and I know that parents of that kid are here in this room, when a child put on goggles and the question was, do I still exist?
Yeah, do you
So
still
that's-
exist
do
in
you still
VR?
exist is a little heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I think one thing I have to say, like at the outset, is I'm deeply indebted to my friend and my colleague and my co-creator of this work, Joris Weidom, who really should be with us today, because he's had an enormous presence on facilitating the creative process as well, I think, quite quietly in the background. And so he should be here to speak for himself in a way. And he's been also deeply transformed by this experience, as we all have, I think, in terms of process, because it's been such an unusual process for each of us. So that's one thing to say. But in terms of perception and transporting us into a different place, I think I would be really remiss if I didn't acknowledge that being welcomed to the table as we were, coming with some fancy headsets and 3D graphics, and really welcomed to collaborate as an equal partner next to light, sound, environment, and audio. Like it's been an incredible process for the medium itself, or for the step that the medium has taken in this process. There's a tremendous amount of skepticism that exists around the incorporation of virtual reality technologies into performance design. And this has been felt tremendously over the last 2 weeks in my conversations with fellow sonographers. And this is, we knew this coming into this process, that skepticism that exists is exactly why we've been committed to work along the lines of scenographic making, along the lines of exploring external and internal dramaturgies to create what is a site-responsive mixed reality performance, where we place the spectator or the experiencer in a different relationship with the medium fundamentally, and within the room and all that is circling about them. So that's sort of like an incredible thing I can say in terms of how we've been welcomed to the table to participate and really challenge what the actual form is of this installation itself. I think coming out of February, we were really astounded that the group all together, where we brought a really shabby prototype of something half-baked in a computer that was like not really working, that everyone went, yeah, and this is going to be maybe the pins, along with the tactile environments and the pools, the pins of the experience. And then it became quite interesting to work in isolation, and I think that's one of the differences, is that VR functions, at least at this point, in a process that is somewhat like a little mini theater piece on its own. It's kind of having all of its respective departments of programming and video and 3D animation and sound and composition, and then sort of appearing to arrive on the day. And I think that was also a kind of felt question of how will it fundamentally integrate into this larger co-creative, this co-creative world. Yeah, so I think we also thought deeply along the lines of how we can explore tactile environments, but with a virtual medium, and how we can have some kind of macro conversations, macro conversations. The light that hangs above those hemispheres in the stations are meant to be tracked one-to-one to the head position. The 3D neuron motion capture suit that we were to experience in the 2 days of play that we never got were to be directly live fed into the headsets and to appear as walking across the bridge with performers in the live space, all of things which are tangible and which are sitting right next to us, but inaccessible because of the sheer instrumentality of time in a production process. So you can imagine the kind of excitement that we've all had in our conversations, but the deep frustration as well to not be actually able to explore the interconnections to the depth with which we would have liked. But at the same time, it's an incredible thing to sit all together and say, wow, we really experimented deeply in a creative process and with these really oppositional mediums together in a space that I think is quite arresting, and at least I've heard that from many people. And yeah, I think I could talk all day.
No, I just wanted to say that I was one of the skeptics in the beginning, and really Jan's been the one who was pushing for the VR very strongly, and I'm grateful for that. But I was also the one who, when you brought the first prototype, I said, you know, you guys, I really get sick with this stuff, so I need a bucket as well if I'm going to try that. And I have to say that whatever happened throughout the process, I had never felt more at home with something that was completely foreign to me in the beginning. So it was really an amazing process, I think, for every single one of us. And as Teresa revealed a little bit in the beginning, of course, nothing is without trouble. And I think from pain, we learn a lot. And I will admit, we all went through a lot of pain. Some of it coming with the technology. And yes, we are absolutely grateful to all of our partners, because I do have to say this would never be possible without companies like Roby, DMB Sound, Showtex, I mean, the list goes on and on. Those people trusted us, and I think the main word that we used to all of them was, art is first, your technology is second, give us your equipment with that. That's a pretty gutsy thing to say. You know, we're going to use your equipment, but screw your technological tools, we want to do art. And they trusted us. They said, yes, we understand, that's supposed to be. And that needs to be a dialogue between the manufacturer and the user. There always has to be some sort of a dialogue, otherwise it's senseless. And that was a big part of this project as well, that we experienced. But we were very disappointed in some moments from technology that either is overheating, there are bugs, there are issues, the server chooses to freeze, so our system integrator is dealing with video instead of system integration, all kinds of things. The other pain came, and I'll reveal that and I'll hand it off to Teresa, because I think we need to come clean about this, because lots of questions came with that situation. And that was placing the tactile environment and the two tables that you've seen, hands-on stuff, into a space that also was an installation. And all of a sudden, this huge question of the visual arts world, composition, clean cut, feeling from an installation, and our senses, the theatricality, the experience of living through a moment, touching something, came into a giant clash just before the opening. It was, I think for me definitely, absolutely revealing about something, about our edge relationship with technology. And I have to say, that was probably, for me, the biggest pain of that process, saying honestly. So I don't know, Teresa, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was extremely stressful and painful, and at one point, it almost didn't make sense to me. I just thought, like, how can this, like, maybe it won't happen. Maybe I'm just going to take away my stuff and just walk away. And actually, in the end, it didn't happen, and it managed to stay. And actually, out of that, something very powerful somehow came out. I'm not even yet sure exactly what it is, but it just reminded me that actually this is not about the final outcome. It never is. No creative output is. It's always about the process, and it's never ends where it ends, but it continues. So for me, this experience, this installation is actually just a step. It's a kind of step along the way. Something powerful has been revealed to me and maybe to other people as well. This that Markéta talks about, this interesting, or to me it seemed like a clash between, maybe that's too strong a word, but I felt it as a clash between a kind of the dominance of the visual sense that Schwankmayer talks about and this repressed sense of touch. So actually, in some way, it had the function, like the installation already for me had a function of creating something powerful through this within the process. And I suppose it continues as well. The dialogue continues. Like I was talking with Paul, that there's such interesting possibilities that could come out of that. And in a way, I think there's no getting away from actually being in the same space physically for the collaboration. I think the challenge of working at distance with Skype or Zoom is very difficult, and something's missing. And that, to me, obviously working with touch and multisensory perception is even more obvious. But I think if we could have had 2 weeks instead of 1 week here, it probably would have transformed the outcome. But it's also about just working with what we've got. And I think it's rich in my view.
Thank you. I think, this was an amazing adventure for all of us, I believe. We could be talking about it probably for a long time, but maybe there are some questions from your side. It would be lovely to hear them, or some of the feedback of the result of our work. So.
I think I have sort of like 2 questions in one. So what was the actual amount of time that you all worked together on this project for? And then looking back at the whole process, where do you see it going if it were to, for example, happen in the next BQ in 4 years? Because VR will be much more advanced then than it is now.
I can answer the second part of the question, but I think somebody may want to pick up the first part of the question.
Are you asking about time together or time from the inception of the project?
From the moment where you all became a group and then started working on the project, I guess. Did you hear me?
So about 10 months, maybe 9 months of sort of collaboration at a distance. 3 days in February, and then a week here and I was not there in February. We had, I mean, one of the interesting things about this, and I will say, I think this was actually also one of the fundamental problems, and it's a worthwhile thing to just sort of keep in mind, is that every single one of us works, 75 hours a week on our work, right? Whether people are in academic posts, people are freelance, people are in a mix of both, whatever it is, we're all working so hard so that it's very easy for the online collaborations and the at-a-distance collaborations to sort of fall to the bottom of your urgency pile. And I know that happened not only for us, but also for our participants. So often, once we involved the participants, which only was about 3 months, I would say, I would have to send reminders, and then send another reminder, and then set a deadline, and then remind people about the deadline. And so I think that inherently one of the things that I think that Teresa is pointing out really importantly is, until you are in person, in the space, whatever it is that you're making, you can't give something your full attention. And I think with sound, certainly, I can only do my work conceptually in advance. There is no, sound doesn't exist until it exists, until I'm actually moving air. There is no, I can make a million sketches and you can listen to them, but I think also like light, you can pre-visualize. But we had a huge, I will say, it was a huge pre-visualization failure, which was that Roman imagined projections on both sides. He imagined 2 layers of scrim on each tower, on each scaffolding tower. And what he did not do was he didn't accurately gauge A, the brightness of his projectors, and B, the white walls of the space. And so one of the major alterations that had to happen in the difference between, if you look, I don't know if there's images of his video imaginings, there's massively bright, incredibly clear, crisp images on these 2 scaffolds. never happened, and it never could, given the way the physical space was set up. So we had to actually, after the first day of video testing, we took down the projectors from one side, we moved all the projectors to the other side, we only projected on one side. The poor Jan had to run out and buy, send someone to buy, 500 meters of black material, and they tried to black out the back of one of the walls. And it was moderately successful, a new form came about, But that idea of being able to pre-collaborate, it has its limits. That was a really long answer to a really short question.
Yeah, and we began Joris modeling the space over Christmas, and then we met together for proof of concept together in February, and then since the mid of February, that's how long it took us to build with 2 of us and a third, a programmer, to do all the scripting. And so it was for the VR I'm speaking of, just so 3 solid months, but with us doing a whole bunch of other things in between.
Yeah, just also with the experimental sound group, we worked on developing a more conceptual space as well. So ideas were shared months and months in advance, and this is a little plug for our fanzine that we've made whilst here, which explains some of our ways of working, and at the end of the talk you can grab one of these, which documents some of the conceptual space, if you like, that was worked on amongst the group and the participants. So that was it's an ongoing process, something that began months and months ago and continues tomorrow.
And yes, hopefully continues to not only just next PQ, but what we had done in 2016 was between PQs. So sometimes we do workshops that are much smaller scale. It's also about scale. We don't necessarily always need to do something this big. There could be very small projects that relate to 36Q in future, and hopefully this will survive into the future. But I think what we are definitely carrying into the future, all of us, are many questions that arise from the collaboration that are starting to connect various different areas in a very interesting and inspiring way. And I really hope that we will continue the process that we started, because something really interesting is coming up from the connections between tactile and sound, and between sound and tactile and the VR. So there's so many different things that are happening. We would like to continue pursuing and bring other people on board and seeing what they see through that. So hopefully this is not the end. Hopefully we can go forward, and hopefully we can also put things in writing for you, because I think a big part of this now is going to be a reflection, noting down some of these questions and trying to find what we discovered in the process. I think sharing that would be very important from my point of view, at least. So any other questions?
Thank you very much for that question. Thank you for the answers. We've got a question here.
I'm just curious to know, each time I put the mask on, the question I ask myself is, does this affect your neural pathways?
It's a very big question. And it should be heeded as the highest, most important level of the precautionary principle practiced in international law, as with your 5G, 4G, 3G cell phones that you carry close to your heads and by your babies. I mean, there's a bunch of lit coming out now about how the brain is being changed and our notions of perception are being changed permanently based on these prolonged exposures of alternate realities. But it's such early days. And so it's a funny thing you mention it, because I think a lot of the parents in the room were asking, well, the line between realities for children are so very thin. And so, you know, at what point do we know, for example, one study that says for prolonged exposure, you have a very difficult time discerning what is the reality once you emerge from that 5-hour session. And so it's a big question for everyone and children and so on and so forth. So maybe you had a different question and I just wanted to go scary.
Well, because I was thinking even, you know, like when you put them on, like is there almost an ability for you to change my thought processes? Does that
For sure,
make sense?
it is.
Like,
Isn't that the point of art?
yeah.
Right. Aren't we trying to recarve your neural pathways with every experience, live or virtual?
Yeah, but I still want some, I guess.
There's no
Does that
secret
make
brain
sense?
waves going in. Paul's not like.
I'm not fearing it in any way. But they were just questions that came to me as I put it on. I thought, you know, is this a possibility? Could this occur? You know, does it have this level of sophistication, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, I love your response. I mean, if it's artful in a like cathartic way or some deeply powerful way, then I think every form is in a way trying to get you to perceive something different. And here it's an incredibly powerful medium that, you know, takes over your visual apparatus in ways that are unprecedented. So it's doing it at a heightened level one could think about. But for example, one of the big preoccupations of the design was this dissonance that's being created between the tactile environment that you're experiencing and the visual sensory presentation, and that, you know, alignment or disalignment that's being created is something that's quite interesting. And I would also say that, like, the ability to look down at the absence of your body, but yet feel so completely embodied because all sorts of other sensory ways in which we feel and experience are being activated, is also like really interesting ground for how things are being changed or what perceptions we're having and how things are being re-perceived. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of questions came out of this.
And I just wanted to say, Paul is giving you a little clue. He's wearing a cone around his neck, so he's definitely anchored. So in case you need to be anchored, there's the tactile bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Like it's the piece deeply meditates on the Anthropocene and our engagement with the real world and the natural world. It's almost like trying to use the medium in a way to subvert the medium in itself. I don't know if I can be that bold, but I mean, it's a deep lamentation on the Anthropocene if you watch all four pieces and you watch the completed narrative. But it asks a whole bunch of questions just perceptually in our body and the sensorium of the body, in a way that's quite amazing.
Thank you very much for the answers. Thank you very much for the question. And we've got another question here.
I have one kind of technical one, personal one from my side, because I'm a lighting programmer and I'm a bit in this world, so I wanted to ask, how did you actually run it? Was it time-coded, or because in this kind of, huge space and huge kind of system where you have to like output to many kind of departments, how was it done and was it crazy?
It was.
It was insane. It
was. I was just, before coming here, I was showing the installation to my brother, and I told him, so when do you think we finished the programming? And he said, well, I don't know, the day before. And it was exactly 5 minutes before opening. It's running on time code to answer the question. Because as the initial idea was to have a strong connection between sound, light and video, it was the logical thing to do. It wasn't easy. I'm very grateful there were students from RITS that magically learned how to use it in 1 week time, not even, maybe 2 days. And so I hope they are still here. And yes, so it's everything I can say about it.
And it's super old-fashioned time code. We were trying to figure out solution after solution, and then basically I rendered a 24 minutes of time code like you would stripe a tape back in 1987. And literally, it's like this giant 24-minute long audio. It's like however many 42 bits of data every second, and it's coming out as analog audio into a time code generator, and it's a generator and clock, and then that data is sent both to the lighting department over IP and to the video server via SMPTE, and it's like the very first. It's, as my friend Nick Cortita says, it's legacy digital. It's like the oldest digital format in the world, and it's keeping this sort of newest of technologies going. And there was a moment, actually a very funny moment, there's one button that you're supposed to press on and the sound, by the way, is all stored in a new software called Canvas. It's made by Ave, A-V-A-E. And the poor developer for that literally was on the phone with us every day for a week. He pushed 19 new releases of the software in order to handle this show. So he would literally be like, oh, okay, that's a bug, great. And 6 minutes later, we'd have a new version. But there's one button that you're supposed to press start with to start the show, and for some reason that information didn't get communicated to the technical department, so they came in and they pressed a different button and it played one time and then the whole installation stopped the second morning of the installation. And so there was actually, for 5 days, the installation was running wrong because someone was like, I'll solve it by looping the time code. And so we built this 2-minute window for the dirty electronics, and that window went away because the time code was not giving that 2-minute window. And it was only when I came back to archive the project that I was like, wait a second, why is this, and I can look at everything and see that it's not right. So often in this, in our rush to find a solution, we cause a bigger problem, so worth thinking about.
Okay, thank you very much for the question and the answer. We've got a question here.
Hi. One of the most amazing things for me was walking in and kind of figuring out how, as an audience member, I was going to take in this massive, overwhelming experience. And I was wondering if you guys had anything interesting to share about how you expected the audience to experience the project and how maybe it was against your expectations, how they experienced it.
Thank you for the question.
No, just what I think that we managed to do is to create a model of a world which is somehow different from our normal world, and it's kind of a landscape which is filled or populated by creators, which is filled and populated by objects, let it be sound objects or visual objects, or then it's populated by visitors and curious people who are searching for something. Then it's populated by people who are in totally different kind of reality, and this world, I think, this was the idea which was it's being disrupted on many levels, and this multi-layered world and experience. This was something I was hoping for, and I think we managed to do this.
Thank you very much for the question and the answer. Chris, would you like to?
I was just going to say, coming later to the project, I was wondering if Chris had a thought about what the real experience was as opposed to the planned experience.
No, I'm going to... You mean by coming later in?
Yeah, by not being a part of the whole planning process. Did you have a different perception of what the actual experience was? Because we had all these ideas about the experience.
Yes, in that sense that it's, you kind of, well, we kind of walked in rather blank, which was on one hand very nice, but on the other hand very confusing. So we discovered bit by bit, and then things started changing, and what I saw in the production process in the last week is that things were growing together, that people had all their own ideas, and bit by bit we started to see them slide together. And then afterwards, when you walk through yourself, then you start to create your own idea, and you start to see other things than probably you expected, and then you talk to people in the audience, and they saw other things than we. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things. You can do this 100 times, and you will have 100 times a different experience. So, and in that sense, it's for me the most difficult part is to explain to people later on what I have seen, because it's an experience that you can't just translate in words. So I think in that sense, it's a very unique thing.
Thank you very much for the question and the answers. We've got another question here.
So we've heard a lot about gathering together in a group and working on this project that has had a lot of collision, it seems, in some ways between these different disciplines. How does it shape, as an individual, in your individual practice, how you're going to approach another collaboration like this again in future?
Yes. I think working with people is always a very emotional experience, and you can talk about the technology and the challenges, but people often present the biggest challenges. And I try. I think from this experience, sometimes you can't take it too personally. You try to make sure that all of the participants are happy and involved, but it's inevitable that some people will be more involved than others. And perhaps a few years ago I would have taken that personally as a kind of failure of my own work. But ultimately I think this experience for me, this PQ, has also taught me to trust in that there is potential for differences, and that's something that I kind of have to learn, I suppose. So that's one thing I've really taken from this.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add?
Teresa?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to add, because I didn't mention that, obviously, because we had these different groups, the main group, and then also we each had our own group. And so within my own group, which was quite big, like John's, we had bigger ones, like 11 people that most of them I've never met before, and we spoke also at distance, Skype before. Then we met, we had 8 days together, and it was just the most incredible collaboration between us. There was like never any conflict. We just did everything completely fluidly. It was just like one of the most wonderful things I could wish for. So I think it also had lots of different layers, which itself was very interesting, like different ways of working, different. Obviously, my group was people I've chosen, and they applied to it because they somehow were, it spoke to them, the concept, so that also makes it easier. But then what was interesting that within this bigger group, maybe I wouldn't have chosen to work with everyone if I saw it all on paper, but actually that it did create an interesting dialogue, and actually I do feel that it's pushed me to something that I'm not even sure that I understand yet. And I think that's why we were saying with Markéta that we need to maybe write about it. And I still need to process it, and I actually still need to be in the space to actually experience it almost as an outsider.
And I think I would just add to that, it was built as an experiment, bringing these areas together to see how they can interact. We knew it's going to be hard. We knew that there are going to be differences, but the hope was that we will learn from those. And I think the big part for me definitely is, just as John said, is the learning and discovering. So there's a lot of discovery that happened on the way and finding new ideas.
And And I just want to say that I think in each of the individual groups, there was an incredible bonding that happened, I think, within each discipline that I also want to take forward in my practice, which is to think about how to fully engage every member of the team. We had, in sound, we had the 5 original participants, and then one of Chris's students said, I'm interested in sound, and Peter joined and became a completely essential part of the team. And we even, there was an intern who was assigned to the sound spot, which wasn't even part of our event, but sound spot didn't start until the 5th. So she came and she became an integral part of, she just had nothing to do for 5 days. So we said, come join us. And the remembering that every single member of the team that you join can just raise the artistic value at every stage. So I feel like remembering that, because we talked a lot about this horizontality, or when it worked and when it didn't, but also the sort of horizontality within your artistic team. And there's this notion, I think there's a notion of designer and assistant and electrician and engineer, and I think none of that is actually terribly productive. I think that when you make a group and you pursue a vision together, who was it? There's an American, it's Bill T. Jones, who says the best idea in the room wins. That's it. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter who it comes from. We all put our ideas on the table, and the best idea at that moment wins. And you try it, and then it fails completely, and then you go to the next idea on the table. So I think remembering that is really useful for me.
I would just echo the idea of a rhizomatic system creating something, and that lack of hierarchy, although it's still there, it was still present at different times, just was a very profoundly different way of operating and working. And I think our commitment to that spreading out horizontally or rhizomatically was very different. And the only other thing I would say about, in answer to the question would be that like a great deal of perseverance and stick-to-itness and honesty in the relationships are what has birthed something quite beautiful.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the answers. We've got another question here.
Hi, I finally got to experience 360 today. And I was really curious as a dance and media artist how much you all thought about body in the design process and embodiment or disembodiment. I had this moment when you were talking with a VR headset on where I was like, I don't know where my hand is in space right now. And it was a really confusing experience of perception. And then I had another experience of my body adjusting to the delay as I was like painting a space. And it was like a really beautiful way of like seeing the world in a different way. And then also a really confusing experience of my own body. And I was just curious, like, if you're thinking about design or lights or like how to set up the space. And I was also honestly like, because there weren't as many people, I was afraid to like go into some of the circle spaces. And so I was really pleased to see photos of like other people interacting because I really wanted to have that tactile experience. So I was thinking about tactile and embodiment and then all the ways that the design came together. And I was just curious about, each of you seems to have a different experience of like dusk and the blue hour, and like how your own bodily perceptions were a part of that design process.
Thank you for the question.
I think I can start with the overall concept, and then the body was at the center of everything from the beginning for all of us. Because that relates to the question about what did we do for the audience? We wanted the audience to be the performer or the one who is really experiencing it. Because on stage, looking at it from theatrical point of view, the audience is looking at the lights from a distance, from sort of a behind the wall. We wanted you as an audience to experience what it's like to actually feel that world. So a lot of body and feeling and all that went to the initial discussions. So.
Rob?
I was suggesting someone else could say something. From a sound point of view, we were able to work with a very immersive environment. So we were using a tool from D&B, and again, this is like about tools and art. So when I described this project to D&B Audio, they came back and said, well, we've just developed a new technology. It's called Soundscape. It's 14 months old at this moment, but when we started talking to them in October, it was 5 months old. And the notion, it's an imaging system, and so it's supposed to let you move the sound in space. There are a number of imaging systems that are out there. The sort of grandfather of them is a system called Timax that's been here at PQ a number of times. But when they said, we want you to try this, that then led to this question of how do we immerse from a sonic point of view? And that was the very first brief I gave to the participants, was that the bodies need to be inside the sound rather than having the sound played at them. It needs to play through them. So that was the sound body experience.
Yeah, I suppose in my tactile world, that the body is the primary focus, the experience of the body, of all the senses, and I suppose that was one of the things that came up as the very interesting moment of this conflict that I've mentioned before, which was this clash between a purely visual aesthetics and actually something that might not be pleasing visually, but actually it's not for vision, it's for touch. So one of the pools, if you've been there, is like a spiral which's got little objects attached to it. So it looks in a very particular way, but actually it's not really about how it looks. It's also, and it should be more about how it feels. If you close your eyes, so you might, and some people have done that, walk with your eyes closed, and you get a very different emotional experience based on tactile values, textures, and I think that's very interesting, because I am also a very visual person, but it kind of raises interesting questions about what should, like how should the things be distributed within an installation, which is a collaboration.
With the experimental sound group, the participants also were actors in a workspace. This idea of a workshop installation is something I've been exploring for a long time. It's not just a workshop, it's a piece of theatre in its own right. You can watch people move, you can see the actions, you can design activities that engage the body in different ways. Other big surprises were we had some plastic tubes that we hung around the space, and how people would quite happily go up and touch these tubes, far more than what we expected. Similarly, like the Austrian exhibit here in the main building, we had a typewriter, which we were going to use for our fanzine, and every day Johanna Oswald would write me questions to answer. But what happened was that the attendees would decide to answer on my behalf, and I could never get to the typewriter. So that was one of the biggest surprises in terms of how people engaged with some of the work that we were doing.
We have perhaps time for one more. Oh, Honza, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just a small addition, but it was also, we've talked about it in connection with VR, and we were also trying, in a way, to steal the body from the people who were actually in the virtual reality experience, to steal it and use it in a space. So, you know the Matrix movie? We were also doing these kind of things, I believe.
Thank you very much for the question and the answers. We've got time for one last question, and it's over here.
It's a question to, performer. It's a question to someone else that asked a question. The lady that said she wanted to engage more in the pools. Did you go when there were the sensory instigators in place, or did you go when we weren't there? Oh, so no one was in there helping you. Oh, okay, interesting. That was it.
Thank you. So we do have time for one more question. it's over here. And the last question goes to you.
Hi, I was just curious, why was the sound in the VR not 360?
What a way to end. Sometimes in life you have great expectations and ambitions. And sometimes the toy potties just fall off the truck. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Markéta. Thank you, Honza. Thank you, Pavla. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, John. Thank you, Chris. Now, what a wonderful thing. You want to know where scenography is born, where the cutting edge things happen and fail and succeed and fail and succeed. It's over here. So thank you very much to the panel and the curators of 360. We have a very special thing to say on behalf of PQ Talks, don't we?
Yes. Because this is the very last PQ Talks, let us do a few things. We do want to mention that over the past 10 years, we had more than 100 talks that happened here, and we had around 250 people coming here speaking to us. Not all of them could make it in the end because some of them didn't get funding, but the number was really amazing, and we want to acknowledge those people, and we want to thank all those people to coming to talk to us here in Prague from all over the world.
We were very pleased with the diversity and how inclusive all the talks were. So as someone told me this afternoon, for me this was a university. And I have to say that this profoundly engaging and incisive and thought-provoking immersion into the dialogues between people over here and people over here has been the most wonderful experience, learning experience for practitioners, for thinkers, for artists, for everyone who was here. There are things that we could have done better. One of the things that we have as a debt was that we wanted to organize a students panel for someone to talk, to chat about what is this for the students. Now, but this would never have happened without certain key people. So I would like to thank our technicians. So I would like to thank Przemek, I would like to thank Kuba, I would like to thank Philip, David, as well as Yuri, who are not here. Very great thanks go to our two interns, Honza and Susian, for their wonderful help. So they are, I think, somewhere over here, hidden. Thank you very much, Honza and Susian. Great thanks goes to our wonderful and absolutely amazing Kamila, the producer of PQ Talks, who's been a stickler. Also, very great thanks go to Zhenya, who helped us organize this. That guy over there, Brad. Everyone has sent an email to Brad, and Brad has always sorted it out. Brad is a hero. Here he is. This space is a wonderful space. It's a big space. For some of the people, it's been daunting, stage fright. However, thanks to Petr Bakos, the architect, who's done some amazing thinking into this and scenographed it for us in such a way that you guys feel at home, that this is a space that you enjoy being in just as much as we do. Great thanks go to Petr Bakos. Finally, I would like to thank the General Director Pavla Petrova, the Executive Director Pavlina Šulcová, and the very special Artistic Director Markéta Fantová, whose visionary genius made this all come together. So thank you.
And of course, finally, last but not least, thank you so much to our participants, whether you come for just this talk or whether you have been with us throughout the days, all 10 days. Thank you so much for sharing this space, this very hot space with us. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you for exchanging the ideas. We love the community that has been created here over the 10 days, and we hope we go on in one way or the other. Thank you.
You were a wonderful audience, and we are going to recommend you.